Morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us with Jamestown Foundation. I'm President Peter Mattis, and we have a really fantastic lineup today to talk about Russian nuclear issues across the whole spectrum of capability, from the military to the civilian to the international statecraft elements of what Moscow does. For those of you who are not that familiar with the Jamestown Foundation, I think it's the simplest way to describe what we do is that we're helping Americans and our partners understand our adversaries and sometimes our allies in their own words and in their own terms. We're dedicated to facts and analysis and making sure that people can understand the world as it is, not in light of policy recommendations or where we would like the world to be or where we would like it to go. I would also invite you to check out our new website because we've done the first major rebuild in more than a decade, and it hopefully has a few little wrinkles that we're working out, but I think it should be enjoyable. And if you see mistakes, please let us know, and we'll try to fix them as quickly as we can. But I think it's a great website that's more searchable, more accessible, and makes it a lot easier to read the great work that you can see from the people that write for us regularly, like Dr. Baev and Sergei Sukhonkin and Arseny. But because we have such great experts, I'm simply going to get out of the way and turn it over to our fellow in the Eurasia program, Anna Davis, to introduce our panelists and to introduce the topic and let them go from here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter, and good morning to everyone joining us, and good afternoon and evening if you're joining from outside Washington or the United States. And welcome also to our distinguished panelists. Thank you for being part of this timely and important discussion on Russia's nuclear posture in 2025 and beyond. As many of you know, the new Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, New START, between the United States and Russia is due to expire in February of next year. We're now witnessing Russian nuclear behavior and activities that were absent even during the Cold War. Russia's nuclear posture is undergoing a period of transformation, and this is marked by increased signaling, expanded international partnerships, and accelerated technological innovation. Moscow uses its civil and its nuclear capabilities as tools to challenge existing security architectures and to shape regional dynamics with new partnerships. These developments reflect a broader shift in the Kremlin's approach to brinkmanship in pursuit of its foreign policy and security goals. And understanding these strengths and the weaknesses of Russia's nuclear posture is essential in order to guarantee that our readiness to detect emerging threats, as well as the ability to pressure any weak points in that posture where and when they may surface. Now's the time to ask the hard questions. So to do that, we're joined by Ambassador John E. Herbst, former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine and to Uzbekistan, as well as Senior Director of the Eurasia Center at the Atlantic Council. We've also got three Jamestown analysts joining us. We've got Dr. Pavel Baev, Research Professor at the International Peace Research Institute in Oslo. We've got Dr. Sergei Sukhonkin, Senior Fellow at the Jamestown Foundation and a Senior Fellow at the Saratoga Foundation. And we've got Arseny Savitsky, CEO of Sarma Analytics, a political and geopolitical risk consultancy. And as Peter said, I'm Dr. Anna Davis, a fellow and contributing editor here at the Jamestown Foundation, and I'll be moderating the discussion. So to let you know, those of you in our audience, you can pose your question to the panelist by writing them in the question function. You can find that at the bottom of your screen. It says Q&A, there's a little box with the question mark. So please do submit those throughout the discussion. Right, so let's get started. Ambassador Herbst, shall we start with you? You previously served ambassador as our U.S. ambassador to Ukraine and to Uzbekistan. So you've got a unique experience on the challenges posed by Russia, no matter if it's on your border or on your radar. So now that you're back in the United States, where would you say we are in terms of our nuclear relationship with Russia?
Well, we've had difficulties in our nuclear and entire relationship with Russia, certainly for many years, going back at least to the late aughts. As you know, Russia had not been interested in renewing the START treaty, which expired. And Russia has played with a nuclear threat as a way to intimidate the United States and Europe from providing additional support to Ukraine since the war began in 2014, but especially since the big invasion of 2022. So what all that means is Russia is pursuing a very dangerous national security policy. They want to revise the arrangements that were made at the end of the Cold War. They want to restore a substantial amount of control over the entire territory that used to make up the Soviet Union. So we're talking about 15 or so other independent states that it wants to control in some fashion. And it also wants to, at a minimum, have a veto over security arrangements on the territory of the former Warsaw Pact. And between the three Baltic states, which used to be considered part of the Soviet Union, not de jure, but de facto and under Moscow's control, and the Warsaw Pact nations, we're talking about a lot of NATO members. So this policy is very dangerous, a policy Putin is pursuing, first and foremost by a savage war marked by numerous war crimes in Ukraine, but also increasing provocations against NATO members in the form of drone flights and MiG intrusions into NATO airspace. And needless to say, this requires a strong response from the West. Western response to all these things has been at best adequate, not sufficiently strong. And this is something that has characterized American policy since Moscow's war in Ukraine began in 2014.
Thank you, Ambassador. Dr. Baev, I'll allow you to pick up on that. So as we mentioned, New START's due to expire in February. It was designed to limit the nuclear arsenals of both countries and strengthen those verification measures and transparency. Earlier in 2023, we've already mentioned, Russian President Vladimir Putin suspended the country's participation in New START. But recently, he proposed that one-year extension. He said in September he was prepared to adhere to the treaty's cap of 1,550 deployed nuclear warheads and 800 delivery systems. So what would you say this means? Does this mean that Russia needs New START more than the United States does?
In fact, this question contains two questions. First is about whether Russia needs the talks on strategic arms control more than the United States. And the second question, does Russia need limitations or ceilings more than the United States? And my answer to the first question about the talks is definitely yes, Russia needs them more. And my answer on the ceilings is probably yes, we're missing a lot of data. But to give you full answer to both questions, I need to elaborate on the first one, on the connection between the Putin's offer and the Ukraine war. And to give you a full answer on the second part, I need to go into details on the posture of Russian strategic forces. So which way do you want me to go?
You choose. Which one is the most important for us to know right now?
I think as far as talks is concerned, the connection with the war in Ukraine is very clear. Putin's policy on that making of the peace deal or not making of the peace deal involves essentially two complementary approaches, narrowing and widening. Narrowing means focusing the talks on the territorial issue in Donbass, which is hugely sensitive to Ukrainians and generally perceived in Washington, D.C. as not very significant. And widening is bringing into the talks all spectrum of other Russia-US connections, economic, Arctic, and nuclear. So indicating that there are certainly more important things to the relationships than just the pesky details of the territorial arrangement in Donbass, which I think is not without a reason, because the kind of narrowing helps to show that Ukrainians are not reasonable. Widening shows that Russia is so important, far more important than just the war. And as for the limits or the ceilings is concerned, my analysis, and my colleagues may disagree, show that the situation with various elements of Russian strategic and non-strategic forces is not particularly great. Problems are most visible certainly in the long-range aviation, which has suffered significant losses and is not in a very good shape at all. But there are also issues related to Russian intercontinental ballistic missiles, the strategic rocket forces, where Putin's great hope, the Sarmat heavy missile, isn't really flying. He advertised it back in the year 18 in his great speech as ready for deployment, and it's still not. And Russia needs to retire its heavy ICBMs, which means that suddenly the ceiling, which was clear in the treaty, is becoming too high for Russia. And Russian forces are shrinking lower. And that's kind of an issue Putin wants to camouflage very much.
Thank you, Dr. Baev. I think on that broadening out question, Dr. Sukhakin, I think we'll move to you to ask about, when we talk about Russia's nuclear posture, we typically do talk about weapons, right? Your work often focuses on the civilian nuclear side as well and the strategic uses of that. So can you talk with us about what role civilian nuclear capabilities play in Russia's nuclear posture and what this might mean for shifting global alliances and security?
Yes, absolutely, Anna. Just to start responding to your question, I want to bring attention to the energy strategy of Russia for the period until 2035, where nuclear energy generation as a process was presented in three main capacities. So on the one hand, it was defined as an element of energy security. Secondly, that was presented as a technology, as an element, as a tool to maintain technology sovereignty for Russia. And finally, the third category was that generation of nuclear energy was a tool of expanding Russia's export potential. So based on this, I would say that Russia has been using civilian nuclear energy as a strategic instrument, as a strategic tool that allows it to strengthen its geopolitical influence, its geopolitical posture. It enables Russia to create long-term dependencies. It also allows Russia to, in a way, maybe reshape alliances with a focus specifically in the global south. But of course, there are some notable exceptions, such as, I think we probably will talk about this later, Hungary. So this is a very, I would say, not a nascent, but increasingly important strategic tool, strategic instrument that allows Russia to increase its, retain its indispensable kind of strategic and essential status of an energy supplier worldwide.
Thank you, Dr. Sukhakin. Arseny Savitsky, let's follow on. So Pavel has mentioned the weapons a little bit. Sergei's talked about geopolitical things and alternative uses of nuclear technology. Can we talk a bit about nuclear weapons? I know that you've recently are looking at Russia's annual nuclear exercise, which showcased the technological developments of the Burevestnik nuclear-powered cruise missile and the Poseidon underwater nuclear-powered vehicle. Putin also announced new nuclear weapons testing, something which hasn't happened since the end of the Cold War, after that potential meeting with US President Donald Trump and Putin was canceled. Would you say these are Russian theatrics? And how seriously should we take the nuclear threat from Russia, in your estimation?
Thank you, Anna, for your questions. And I think it is both. From the one hand, it's theatrics, but on the other hand, it's a transition to a new paradigm, so-called offensive nuclear deterrence, That is how some Russian political scientists, such as Dmitry Trenin, Sergei Karaganov, and Fyodor Lukyanov, are framing this approach. But let me start with the theatrics, and I would like to make some connections with the expiring New START treaty, showcasing of Burevestnik and Poseidon systems during the annual strategic nuclear exercise is definitely not a coincidence and likely aimed at laying the foundations for the future arms control and strategic stability talks with the United States. According to Russian MFA officials, with new arms control arrangements, Russia intends to achieve a so-called new strategic equation vis-a-vis United States that would take into account all factors of strategic stability, including new types of weapons, promising technologies, and even new political realities. The Russian side also considers it necessary to include in this big deal not only traditional strategic weapons, but also all nuclear and non-nuclear weapons that can perform strategic tasks. For Russia in particular, it's US tactical nuclear weapons deployed in Europe. And according to the Kremlin, since the US doesn't currently possess some types of weapons such as Poseidon, Burevestnik, Avangard, hypersonic missiles, it is logical to assume for them that in such hypothetical negotiation format, Russia will demand concessions on issues of its interests, such as missile defense, INF, drones, cyber, maybe balance of forces in exchange for refusing to increase the number of such weapon systems, meaning Burevestnik, Poseidon, and Avangard. Speaking about the transition to the new paradigm or so-called offensive nuclear deterrence, everything what we have been observing since the beginning of large-scale war against Ukraine in 2022 is the manifestation of this new Russian paradigm. This includes pre-deployment of Russian tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus with a clear offensive pattern and infrastructure for operational combat use in close proximity to a potential theater of military operations, meaning Ukraine and NATO eastern flank. Second, updates of Russian nuclear doctrine or basic principles of state policy of the nuclear deterrence that lowers threshold for use of nuclear weapons in response to deeper engagement of the Western countries with Ukraine. And third, preparations for the resumption of nuclear testing at Novaya Zemlya archipelago as a demonstrative nuclear strike, as a preparation for a demonstrative nuclear strike, as a first step in the nuclear escalation leader. So Russian political scientists are framing now a paradox that despite of Russian nuclear signaling, the West hasn't stopped providing military technical support to Ukraine, but constantly is deepening and escalating its support and engagement, including supplies of aircrafts, then long-range strike capabilities to Ukrainian armed forces, and so on and so forth. In fact, they claim that the West is waging a proxy war with Russia via Ukraine, but the current mode of nuclear deterrence doesn't work. Therefore, Russia has to do something. They suggest that Russia must exercise a different type of deterrence, which they call offensive one, which is aimed at intimidating and spreading fear of a large-scale nuclear escalation among the Western elites to prevent their deeper engagement and push them into negotiations with the Kremlin with the acceptance of Russian terms. But they are going further in their speculations, saying that this should include not just signaling about its determination for the use of nuclear weapons, but even actual employment. For instance, in the form of demonstrative nuclear strike or test at Новая Земля Archipelago or in some other areas and so on and so forth. That is why I believe that resumption of nuclear testing is highly likely. And it seems that Russian leadership has been already prepared the list of arguments for such move. They are complaining that United States is doing a lot of subcritical tests. They are concerned about the simulation games conducted by the Pentagon. And also, as some Russian military intelligence agencies claim, in particular the SVR, they have some evidence that United States is preparing to resume this exercise either. So why should we waste our time and not to test it in a preventive? So here finishing, and maybe later I can elaborate more on some particular details.
Yeah, I think that's a great foundation for us to keep the discussion going. Dr. Baev, let's circle back to you. We've talked about Russia, the West, one of the biggest nuclear weapon states, though, which is missing from New START, is the People's Republic of China. Aside from Russia, it's the only non-Western signatory of the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. India, Pakistan, North Korea, none of them have signed the NPT. Israel and Iran, uncertain cases of nuclear weapons development. So would you say that New START is outdated unless it accommodates some sort of involvement by the PRC or by other nuclear weapon states as well? Or should we scrap nuclear arms limitation treaties like this one because the other side doesn't necessarily adhere to them?
Well, the treaty is outdated by many parameters, certainly, and new technologies are really moving very fast, including those that Russia develops. Neither Burevestnik, nor Poseidon, nor Oreshnik are really within the limits of the New START, and without taking into account the system, arms control doesn't make that much sense. But as far as China is concerned, from the Russian perspective, it's much better not to have China in, because in Russian perception, it is the bilateral dialogue with the United States that lifts its profile. And not only internationally, kind of giving it the feeling of a peer competitor with the United States, but also in the eyes of China, where Chinese nuclear forces are still in the Russian eyes. Not just that they are not a threat to Russia, but they are also not on the level which would justify the expansion of the format and inclusion of China. There is no secret in Russia that China doesn't want any limitations, and Russia is very eager to kind of accommodate this Chinese reluctance to engage, even if, for what I am able to see in Russian expert analysis, there is not particularly deep knowledge in Russia about the kind of real development of Chinese nuclear arsenal. Mostly Russian analysts rely on data and analysis from the United States. So there is no insight, really. There is no some original information that Russian experts can rely upon. It is really secondary and third-hand information. So there is no deep knowledge, but at the same time, there is no main concern, and there is a great desire to lift Russia's status in the eyes of China by keeping the strategic nuclear talks bilateral with the United States.
Very interesting. I think Dr. Sukankan, let's follow on. So let's keep it outside of Russia West, because you've mentioned Russia's geopolitical nuclear energy strategies. Where would you see Russia's focused on most in the world on ensuring its relevance in the nuclear order and potentially ensuring that, like you said, other states are dependent on it for those nuclear technologies? And on that note, are there any areas within that the United States in particular should be concerned?
Okay, so building on what I said before, given the fact that nuclear sector and generation of and export of nuclear energy should be seen as a strategic instrument of Russia's foreign policy, I would highlight three important challenges or three main factors that emanate from Russia's policy. So first of all, by relying on this instrument, Russia acquires a new form, new type, I would say, of soft power. Because if Russia and when Russia engages in this type of collaboration, it goes well beyond simple import-export relations. So if we think about this, if we think about Rosatom activities when it comes to construction of nuclear power plants, again, getting back to this soft power argument, what we can see is that Rosatom and Russia in general, it develops this very interesting, in a way, unique type of soft power infrastructure that rests on at least four important pillars. On the one hand, it's nuclear energy information centers that allow Russia and Rosatom to spread the message, to spread the word about its activities. It's definitely educational programs for various international research centers, universities, and other tertiary and other education facilities. Another important, very interesting, and frequently overlooked element is international youth forums. For example, Russia has been running, Rosatom more specifically, has been running a unique, a very interesting program called Ledokol Znani in Russian. So it's an icebreaker of knowledge, which basically connects and allows Russia to develop and promulgate ties with young emerging leaders among countries, especially in the global south. And finally, speaking about this soft power aspect, this allows Russia to be integrated in this global low carbon agenda, even though the Russian authorities definitely are not known, they don't have a track record of ecological sustainability, but given the global agenda in general, Russia's ability to produce and spread its nuclear capabilities, civilian nuclear capabilities, definitely give Russia an upper hand here. So what is a result? We have Russia being able to capitalize on some kind of educational diplomacy, which in a way reminds me of the Soviet times when graduates or people, academics, experts, practitioners were related to the Soviet Union, would they would go back to their home country, they would maintain and preserve this positive image of the USSR, of the Soviet system. And in a way, in fact, it's still helping Russia in certain areas, in certain ways. The second major challenge is the fact that production, generation, and export of nuclear energy allows Russia to be integrated in this multidimensional, to maintain this multidimensional integration model, which allows Russia to develop those dependencies, not only financially, but also in a way institutionally, in terms of engineering, logistics, as well as other tools. And the last point that I want to highlight here is that, in effect, if we think about Russia's capabilities in civilian nuclear energy and the way its model of operation, it goes well beyond nuclear energy itself. So, for example, I have at least three examples I can think of. One of them is Russia's investments and Russia's activities in critical metals, critical minerals, including, let's say, in South America. For example, Rosatom has concluded an agreement with Bolivian authorities to develop lithium deposits, lithium complex in the country. It's also related to Russia's ability. The second point is Russia's ability to promote its small modular reactors and play certain role in generation of certain types of hydrogen, especially green hydrogen. And finally, of course, generation of nuclear energy also plays a significant role in such areas as nuclear medicine, the use of nuclear technologies, nuclear energy in various industries, including agriculture. So just getting back to your initial question, if I have some time. So what I see here is basically two main sources of challenges. So on the one hand, the first aspect is that internal dimension when it comes to the United States. What I'm observing is that the process of decoupling from Russia dependency has been really slow, has been quite slow. Based on the information that I have from the Russian sources for 2024, 2025, about, I'd say, 20% of US nuclear fuel was still enriched uranium. I mean, still came from Russia. So that's a very, very slow process of decoupling. And in the short run, it will be very hard to deal with given very high inelasticity of production in the industry, which requires lots of regulations, approvals, investments. So that's the first challenge. And the external development, what really strikes me and what I find to be quite interesting is that in its regional activities, Russia does not engage with just isolated partners, but it mainly works with those countries, with those players that, in a way, form the strategic core of the region. So think about it. For example, the nuclear power plant Akkuyu in Turkey. So this gives Russia a kind of influence or ability to influence things in Turkey, and which is a strategic crossroad. Egypt, which gives Russia this kind of inroads to the greater Middle East. Bangladesh, as well as nascent emerging activities in India. The only exception may be Hungary, which is not the central player in East Central Europe, but still, Hungary's role is special. It's unique in a way. It allows Russia to participate in transnational European projects, where we can see also firms from Germany, from other countries also working, also being integrated. And where I expect, which moves and in which areas I expect next, well, it's definitely Central Asia. I would say the main focus will be Uzbekistan. In Kazakhstan, this didn't work exactly the way the Russian side planned. Priority was given to China, but with regards to Uzbekistan, Russia still holds an upper hand. Definitely Indonesia. Indonesia, which is for whom nuclear energy will play a very important role. Definitely Vietnam, especially after Japan's decision to exit from the local nuclear project. Potentially Nigeria, and also Russia will definitely continue its collaboration, its activities in and with India.
Thank you, Sergey. Arseny, we'll move to you, and then Ambassador Herbst, we'll come to you with the last question. I'm mindful of time. We do want to address the audience questions as well. So Arseny, we've talked about advantages that Russia's got, but I'd like to bring it back actually to disadvantages, potentially. Russian economy is straining, sanctions have driven supply chain disruptions, arm exports have fallen, military production seems to be sort of the only sector that's showing any real growth. So can you discuss whether Russian nuclear technological development is coming at the expense of other areas, and how sustainable is this development? And then we'll move to Ambassador Herbst, and then we'll have audience questions.
So yes, indeed, for a long time, the modernization of strategic nuclear forces served as a top priority for Russian leadership and the overall driving force behind Russia's rearmament, implying the abandonment of missiles and the careers developed back in Soviet times. However, the situation has become more complicated since the large-scale war against Ukraine. And the 2024 year was an illustration of those problems Russia has been facing with. It was a very ambitious plan for this year. Russian MOD was supposed to commission and put into duties weapons for all elements of the nuclear triad, including, for instance, Knyaz Pozharsky submarine, Sarmat heavy ICBM, several Tu-160 strategic bombers, but actually they failed. None of that none of that points was completed, and it's due to, of course, the constraints related to sanctions, then the overall economic and financial situation within the military-industrial complex in Russia, the lack of personnel, which is quite huge despite all this financial stimulus. And therefore, yeah, we see a lot of delays, especially when it comes to the ICBMs. Sarmat was supposed to be put on combat duty already last year. So, but still there are problems, judging by these failed tests. With these Baev class submarines, Russia is also facing problems because it can't, the Sevmash can't replace some Western components, and it has launched some import substitution programs aimed at replacing these components, maybe in best case scenario in 2028. The conditions of the strategic aviation is very poor, especially after the successful operation conducted by Ukrainian intelligence services, during which they actually destroyed almost 35% of all strategic carriers. First of all, Tu-95 and Tu-22. So definitely they are facing a lot of problems now. But if you look at the figures which Russian leadership are speaking about, that 95% of modern equipment has been delivered to the nuclear forces, it seems that the Kremlin is dissatisfied by the current status quo. This is the first point. And my second point, that in the conditions of the war with Ukraine, the priorities are shifting towards conventional forces. Due to the nature of this war, first of all. And my third point is that Russia is increasingly investing now into the so-called asymmetric capabilities, such as Poseidon, Burevestnik, Avangard, and Oreshnik systems, that they believe give them more advantages compared to the investments into the traditional nuclear triad.
Thank you, Arseny. Ambassador Herbst, we started with you. Let's end on a note that you're going to leave with us. And then I'll ask one very quick final question of the panelists. So we've discussed in quite a lot of detail different areas of Russia's nuclear posture. So let's bring it back to this bigger picture and discuss the importance for the United States and our NATO allies. As a former ambassador, what would you say are the most important policy priorities to have in place in relation to Russia's nuclear posture from 2026 onwards?
Okay. I think the most important factor, there are many important factors, but the most important factor is the geopolitical intention of Russia, along with its geopolitical capability. That intention is malign and dangerous. Clearly, the most dangerous country in the world today, not because it's the most powerful, but because it's the most willing to take risk and it has a substantial, but perhaps overrated amount of power, is Russia. Putin's aim, again, is to reestablish substantial Kremlin control over the policies of the landmass that made up the Soviet Union, which includes, as we know, 3 NATO members, and also to have a veto over the security policies of the former Warsaw Pact states. And it's pursuing this objective via a war crime-filled war on Ukraine. And were Russia to achieve, were Putin to achieve his objective of establishing effective political control over Ukraine, dangers to especially the Baltic states, but also Poland, Romania, go way up, not to mention, of course, Georgia and Kazakhstan. So we have a critical interest, the United States, in stopping that. And this panel is about nuclear policy, as it should be. And as one of the panelists mentioned, thinkers like Trenin and Karaganov talk about the offensive deterrent use of nuclear weapons. And this has been a feature of Putin's policy, especially since the big invasion. And while this policy has not stopped the West, including the United States, from providing substantial support to Ukraine, it has been successful in slowing that support. Biden was clearly intimidated by Putin's nuclear threats. Had we armed Ukraine properly for the offensive of 2023, the Russians probably would have lost the land bridge to Crimea. But Putin's nuclear threats, again, held Biden's hands from taking the smart geopolitical move for the United States and, for that matter, for NATO. I think Trump is less susceptible to Putin's nuclear blackmail, as he demonstrated in the summer when Medvedev made comments about nukes and Trump said he was moving U.S. submarines closer to Russia. The right move. But now he sees Trump today talking about the dangers of World War III in the same way that Biden did, which is actually only encourages Kremlin intransigence in its war on Ukraine. I think another factor we need to add to the conversation, which hasn't quite come up, are the increasing and increasingly dangerous Kremlin provocations against NATO states. The drones flying into Poland, the drones flying over airports in Brussels and Munich, the sabotage on the Polish train lines, not to mention, of course, sabotage of different factories, especially arms factories in Germany and elsewhere. These are dangerous games, and Putin is counting on timidity in the West. And sadly, he's not being proved wrong. That's why it's funny. It's a paradox. It's Western weakness, not Western strength, that brings closer the possibility of a larger scale war. A Russian move, for example, against one of the Baltic states once it believes it has Ukraine well in hand. Last point. Despite all this, I think nuclear talks with Russia make perfect sense. If we can manage the growth of our nuclear arsenals while also take into account China's intention to become a nuclear peer of the United States and Russia in 10 to 15 years. And of course, China has the economy and the technological know-how probably to do that. Russia's unwillingness to include China demonstrates how Putin's revisionist aims in Europe are actually damaging Russian security. One, because it has led to 2 new NATO members in the West, and 2, because he's ignoring the real danger to Russian territorial integrity, which is China. Last point. I think that the I think I agree with the speaker who spoke about Russian focus on Oreshniks and Burevestnik, but these have not been particularly impressive weapon systems. I agree, as one other panelist said, and I apologize for not having associating the individual panelists with the individual statements, because it has been a terrific panel, that we should not expect that Russia's nuclear capability is quite as great as they pretend that it is. Just as their conventional capability, we were told, had been reformed and they were going to just roll through Ukraine, proved to be nonsense. I suspect their vaunted nuclear capability, aside from the major damage that the Ukrainians inflicted on via spiderweb, is a lot less than the Russians pretended to be. With that, again, we need a stronger pushback against Russian conventional aggression, against Russian provocations against NATO nations, but also we should be willing to talk seriously about arms control with the Kremlin. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. All right, lightning round for everyone. Ambassador, we'll start with you. One word. What would you use to describe the next year in our nuclear relationship with Russia?
I think that Putin will continue to wave his nuclear stick to try to persuade the United States and Europe to provide less support to Ukraine. I don't think they will succeed at all in Europe. We're seeing Europe stepping up geopolitically in ways it has not done for decades, and that's a good thing. I don't know how this will work in the United States. Again, I don't think what President Trump said today was helpful, but I don't think it reflected him being intimidated by Putin's threats. But there are people in the Trump team, just as there were many people in the Biden team, who are intimidated by those nuclear threats. And those people in the Trump team do have access and influence with the president. But I think his own instincts cut against that. Thank you.
So your one word?
Oh, I'm sorry. My one word, one word is...
One word. It's a tough one.
I'll say, come see, come saw. It's actually 3 words.
We'll
like
take
4.
it.
Okay, all right, thank you.
We'll take it. Sergey, your one word?
Pragmatic.
Sorry, say it again.
Pragmatic.
Pragmatic.
Yeah.
Pavel.
Yes, I'm now with. My word would be fortitude, in the sense of all fortitude. Yes, in the sense of that old British slogan, keep calm and carry on.
Well said. Arseny, your one word.
So my word will be escalation.
Escalation.
Yes,
All right.
especially if the Russia-Ukraine war is continuing and there is no any big deal between Russia and the United States. So probably Russia will continue escalating.
Right. Well, thank you all. Let's move to some questions. We've got 12 minutes before we're officially due to end. So if I can ask you to keep your answers to about 30 seconds. I know it's difficult. We'll try. Let's go with the question, this one, about PRC President Xi Jinping and India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi have cautioned Putin not to go nuclear in Ukraine. To what extent have these entreaties caused Putin to be more restrained? I'm not going to call on anyone because I think all of you would answer that one differently. Would anyone like to take that one in particular? Ambassador, yeah, let's go with you then. Go on.
I believe that what has been a restraining influence, but I also think that the non-utility, the ineffectiveness of a possible tactical nuclear strike on Ukraine has also played a role.
Pavel, did I see your hand up as well?
Yes, I think that the restraining influence of China was very visible in the long pause in Putin's brinksmanship, nuclear brinksmanship we had up until the point where he suddenly was so irritated by the cancellation of the summit in Budapest. And then we had a new surge in his nuclear blackmail, which again now may be on a pause, but I think China's influence was very visible earlier this year.
Right, Arseny, I see your hand up, but there is another question that I would like to direct to you, so maybe you can answer them both at the same time.
Okay.
Because we got a question about Burevestnik and the Poseidon, both the nuclear-powered missiles. The question is, many of these programs have questionable testing records and long-term viability. How seriously should U.S. planners take these new capabilities, and to what extent should they reshape U.S. strategy? And then Sergey, you might be able to see in the questions, there's a couple here on the energy one that will come to you in a minute. Arseny.
I would like to oppose to the previous commentators regarding the restraining effect of China's policy or stance. Just a small example. In March 2023, when Chairman Xi paid a visit to Moscow, they signed a joint declaration together with Vladimir Putin, in which they obliged not to deploy nuclear weapons outside their national territories. And just in 5 days after this, Vladimir Putin announced that he's going to deploy tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. So
Right, so we've lost Arseny for a second. So we might circle back to continuing his answer on that question. And Arseny, if you can hear us, then you know what's going on. Sergey, let's come to you on this question, our first two that we got, both about nuclear. So we've got the first one, given China's PRC's efforts to expand its global exports of nuclear reactors, how's Russia's push in nuclear energy affecting its relationship with China? And then the other one was, how's Russia's nuclear push manifested in the African context? So we got questions about Mali and Niger, uranium exploitation. Would you like to address these two in one?
Oh, yes, I'll try. I'll try. So in the short run, I think what we will see is sort of friendly rivalry between Russia and China, because the target market for both Russia and China is very similar, is actually the same. It's countries of the global south. But given the position that Russia has found itself to be in after 2022, I believe that geopolitics will still prevail, at least for Russia, over economic considerations. What I mean by this, there are two interesting cases here. One of them is Kazakhstan, and the story about the first nuclear power plant in Kazakhstan. Initially, the Kazakhstan authorities they announced that the priority in construction in this consortium will be given to Rosatom. And then they changed, basically, the public statement was changed, and it was announced that it's actually China and Chinese firms that will be given a priority. And maybe, as Kazakhstan political leadership stated, they will actually commission China to build a second and maybe even the third nuclear power plant. While Russia was, in a way, kind of marginalized. It's still a member of this consortium, but it is managed, it's headed by China. And the second interesting point is it's actually concerned about the second question about Africa and uranium. What we are seeing today in the global market of uranium is what I call bifurcation, where Western countries will primarily purchase uranium mainly from such countries as Australia and Canada, while Russia and most important China will continue buying uranium from Kazakhstan, maybe from Kazakhstan, from sub-Saharan Africa. So I think that at least in the short run, Russia and China, or issues related to nuclear power generation and supplies of critical technologies, will not lead to a geopolitical a breakdown or any escalation between Russia and China. After all, if we think about the Sino-Russian relations in the realm of civilian nuclear power generation, Russia and China still collaborate, still cooperate in many ways and on many projects.
Thank you, Sergey. And Arseny, you dropped out just mid-sentence. So did you want to continue that thought? Yeah, please.
So in Moscow, Chairman Xi and Vladimir Putin signed a joint declaration in March 2023, which obliged Russia and other countries, China including, not to deploy its nuclear arsenal outside of the national territories. And just in 5 days, Vladimir Putin announced that Russia would deploy tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. So, of course, in some cases, China's position matters for Russia, but in others doesn't. And the way how Russia deployed tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus suggests that. Regarding the technical characteristics, as far as I know, the U.S. military hasn't been surprised by these tests and its technical capabilities of Poseidon or Burevestnik. So as for that moment, it seems that the American side is ignoring the existence of such systems. But when it comes to other developments, such as deployment of Oreshnik system in Europe, which will create a lot of threats, first of all, for European allies, it could be the point. But at this moment, since Russia doesn't
All right, I think we've lost you again, Arseny. So we're gonna hold that thought. There we go. Oh, are you back now? We'll wrap it up. You're muted, but you are back.
Yeah, sorry for that.
10 seconds.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
since Russia doesn't have a lot of deployed systems, so probably at this moment, the US could ignore this.
Thank you. Right, let's go with one more question. And I'm thinking, Pavel, maybe we'll at least start with you on this. It's about academics and thinkers inside. You've seen it. Yeah. Do academics and policy commentators play a proactive role in any way in shaping Kremlin policy? Or do they play a more reactive role in justifying decisions that are made by the Kremlin?
Mostly propaganda works in support of the decisions which are already. I think Karaganov in this regard is an exception. I know a little bit of him personally. I started my academic career working with him during Gorbachev times, different times. But he is definitely trying to advance an argument different from the main course, essentially boiling down to the point that without the use of nuclear weapons, this war is unwinnable, which, in some aspect makes sense. It is not winnable. And the deal, even the 28 points drafted mostly in the Kremlin, isn't really a win. It's a draw. We tilted more towards Russia than towards Ukraine, but Karaganov argues a point which resonates somewhere, but isn't really influencing much current strategic thinking. He is too detached from from various Putin circles now. And just one point on the new weapon system. I think it is very odd that the only evidence we have about the test of Burevestnik, a cruise missile, nuclear propelled, which allegedly stayed in the air for 14 hours, is the words of Valery Gerasimov, the chief of Russian General Staff. And they are not very reliable words. We do not have a shred of independent confirmation, and such a missile would have been spotted, would left a tray. So the absence of this open source evidence, I think, puts a lot of doubt on whether the weapon system is really tested.
I think that's a provocative note to end on. I think that gives us a lot to think about, actually. So on that note, I think we'll say final thanks to each of you. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us. I know you're in different time zones. thanks to Ambassador Herbst. In his absence, he's had a prior commitment that he's needed to dip off to. But Dr. Baev, Dr. Sukankan, Mr. Savitsky, thank you each for joining us. And everyone online, thank you as well for joining in and for your insightful questions. To let you know, we're going to be releasing a special series of analysis, a special issue very soon, authored by our panelists. So keep a lookout on our website, like Peter mentioned at the beginning of this, for that. But in the meantime, from all of us here at Jamestown, we wish you all the very best in 2025, and we will see you again in the new year. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.